The bell rang at Crestwood Preparatory Academy, sharp and clear, cutting through the humid Atlanta morning like a knife. Students poured out of cars with tinted windows and leather seats, some stepping onto the pavement in designer sneakers that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Others walked from the bus stop down the street, backpacks slung over one shoulder, eyes fixed on the ground as if trying to disappear before they even reached the front gates. Among them was a girl who didn't quite fit into either group. She walked alone, shoulders back but not stiff, head held high but not proud, just steady. Her uniform was clean, pressed even, but it had that slightly faded look that comes from being washed too many times. The blazer sleeves were just a hair too short, and the pleated skirt had been carefully mended at one seam. Her shoes were scuffed at the toes, not from neglect, but from walking, lots of it. She carried a lunchbox wrapped in a cloth napkin, the kind you'd see in old family photos, not in a school where most kids ordered sushi or avocado toast from the cafe down the block. Her name was Amara, though no one knew it yet. Not really. To the students of Crestwood, she was just another face, another scholarship kid probably. They'd seen them come and go. Some lasted a semester. Others stuck around but kept to themselves, never quite breaking into the inner circles where last names opened doors and summer homes in the Hamptons were casual conversation topics. Amara didn't mind being invisible. In fact, she preferred it. Back in her old neighborhood school, she'd been known. The girl who aced every test, who stayed late to help teachers grade papers, who read 3 books a week just for fun. But here she wanted a fresh start. No expectations, no labels. Just a chance to learn, to grow, to figure out who she was without the weight of other people's assumptions. She'd only been at Crestwood for 2 weeks, but already she could feel the unspoken rules. Where you sat at lunch mattered. What brand was on your water bottle mattered. Even the way you said hello to a teacher, too eager, and you were a tryhard. Too cool and you were disrespectful. It was a tightrope walk, and everyone seemed to know the steps except her. She found an empty seat near the back of her first period English class. The room smelled like old paper and lemon-scented cleaner. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes in the air. She pulled out a notebook with a plain black cover. No glitter, no stickers. Just a few pencil marks on the corner where she'd absent-mindedly doodled during homeroom. A few minutes later, the classroom door swung open and a group of girls entered like they owned the place. They weren't loud exactly, but their presence filled the room. Designer bags swung from their shoulders. Their hair was perfectly curled or sleekly braided. One of them wore diamond studs that caught the light every time she turned her head. They slid into seats near the front, laughing softly about something that happened over the weekend. A party at someone's lake house maybe, or a shopping trip to Buckhead. Amara kept her eyes on her notebook. She didn't need to hear their conversation to know she wasn't part of it. The teacher, Mr. Ellis, a kind man with thinning hair and a voice that always sounded tired but patient, began the lesson on Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing. Amara loved Shakespeare. She'd read all his plays by the time she was 14, acting out scenes in her bedroom with a flashlight as her spotlight. She raised her hand when Mr. Ellis asked about Beatrice's wit, her voice quiet but clear. Beatrice uses humor to protect herself, she said. She's smart, but in her world, being too smart as a woman could be dangerous. So she hides her intelligence behind jokes. A few students turned to look at her, some curious, others indifferent. But one of the girls from the front row, the one with the diamond studs, gave a small, almost imperceptible snort. She didn't say anything, but the message was clear. Who does she think she is? Amara didn't react. She never did. Her mother had taught her that dignity was louder than anger. Let your actions speak, she'd say. People will hear them eventually. At lunch, Amara sat at a small table near the window, unwrapping her sandwich, peanut butter and banana, her favorite. She ate slowly, watching the courtyard outside. Kids played basketball, laughed, took selfies. She didn't feel lonely exactly. Just separate. Like she was watching a movie she hadn't been invited to star in. That's when she heard it. Is that the new scholarship girl? One voice asked, just loud enough to carry. Yeah, another replied. She came in on the city bus yesterday. Can you believe it? At this school? She acts like she belongs here, the first one said, voice dripping with mockery. Like she's gonna quote Shakespeare and suddenly be one of us. Amara kept eating. Her hands didn't shake. Her breath stayed even, but inside something tightened, a small, hard knot in her chest. She'd heard it before in different forms in different places, people assuming her worth based on what she wore, where she lived, how she got to school. It never got easier, but she'd learned how to carry it without letting it show. Later that afternoon in history class, the teacher assigned a group project on the civil rights movement. Students were told to form teams of 4. Amara waited, hoping someone would ask her to join. She wasn't shy, just cautious. She knew how these things went. One by one, groups formed. Laughter, chatter, the rustle of notebooks being shared. Amara stayed at her desk pretending to read the textbook. Finally, only 2 students were left ungrouped. Her and a quiet boy named Leo who always wore headphones and never spoke unless called on. They exchanged a glance. No words needed. They moved to a corner table together. But before they could even open their books, the girl with the diamond studs, Taylor, Amara had learned her name by now, stood up and addressed the class with a fake sweet voice. Mr. Dawson, isn't there some rule about making sure everyone in a group actually belongs here? I mean, what if someone's only here because they got a free ride? How do we know they'll pull their weight? The room went quiet. A few kids looked down. Others smirked. Mr. Dawson frowned. Taylor, he said firmly. Everyone in this classroom earned their place. And group work is about collaboration, not judgment. Taylor shrugged as if she hadn't just tried to humiliate someone in front of 30 peers. She turned back to her friends, whispering something that made them giggle. Amara didn't look up. She focused on the page in front of her, on the words about Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott. She thought about how those people had faced far worse threats, violence, hatred, and still stood tall. Her situation felt small in comparison, but it still hurt. That night at home, Amara sat at the kitchen table while her mom washed dishes. The apartment was small but cozy, filled with books and photos of family, her dad smiling in his army uniform, her grandparents standing in front of a little house in Birmingham, her mom holding baby Amara with tired but proud eyes. You okay, baby? Her mom asked, drying her hands on a towel. Amara nodded. Just tired. Her mom sat across from her, studying her face. They giving you trouble at that school? Amara hesitated. She didn't want to worry her mom. Her mother worked long hours at the public library, often coming home with aching feet and a stack of overdue books she'd stayed late to reshelve. She'd sacrificed so much to get Amara into Crestwood, filling out endless forms, attending financial aid meetings, even selling her grandmother's silver teapot to cover the uniform costs. It's fine, Amara said softly. Kids are just figuring things out. Her mom reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You know who you are, right? You come from strong people, smart people, good people. Don't let anyone make you forget that. Amara nodded again, but this time it felt more real. What no one at Crestwood knew, not the teachers, not the students, not even the headmaster, was that Amara's family wasn't struggling. Not anymore. Her grandfather, a quiet man with calloused hands and a sharp mind, had started with nothing. He'd worked construction during the day and studied real estate law at night. By the time he was 40, he owned his first apartment building. By 60, he had a portfolio of properties across Georgia, shopping centers, office buildings, luxury condos downtown. He never bragged, never drove a fancy car, always wore the same worn-out boots. When he passed away 2 years ago, he left everything to his only granddaughter. The will was clear, the money was hers, but it came with conditions. She had to finish high school, go to college, learn how to manage it wisely, and most importantly, never let wealth define her character. Her mom had agreed. They'd kept it quiet, not out of shame, but out of respect. They didn't want Amara growing up thinking money solved everything. They wanted her to earn her confidence, her friends, her place in the world, on her own terms. So they lived simply. Took the bus, bought secondhand clothes, packed lunches, and Amara never complained. She understood. She saw how her grandfather's success hadn't changed his kindness, his humility, his belief that everyone deserved a fair shot. Now, at Crestwood, she was testing that belief every single day. The next morning, Amara walked through the school gates again. Same uniform, same lunchbox, same quiet steps, but something had shifted inside her. Not anger, not fear, just resolve. She wouldn't change who she was to fit in. and she wouldn't let anyone make her feel small for being exactly who she was. As she passed the main office, she saw a flyer on the bulletin board. Annual Crestwood Charity Gala, honoring community leaders and benefactors. Her grandfather's name was on the list of past honorees. She paused for just a second, then kept walking. She didn't need a spotlight to shine. But if the truth ever came out, and she knew it might someday, she hoped it would teach people something important. That worth isn't measured in bank accounts or brand names. It's measured in how you treat others when no one's watching. And Amara had been watching. She'd seen who laughed at others' expense, who offered a hand without expecting anything back, who stayed silent when they should have spoken up. She filed into her first class, notebook in hand, ready for whatever the day would bring. Outside, the Atlanta sun climbed higher, warm and steady, just like her. The days at Crestwood began to blur together, each one layered with small humiliations that never quite broke Amara, but wore on her like steady rain on stone. She kept her head down, stayed focused on her work, and tried not to let the whispers follow her into the library or the quiet corners of the courtyard where she liked to read during free periods. But ignoring the cruelty didn't make it disappear. If anything, it seemed to feed it. Taylor and her group had settled into a routine. They didn't shout or shove or do anything that would get them sent to the principal's office. Nothing that left a mark you could see. Their weapons were subtler. A raised eyebrow when Amara answered a question in class. A snicker when she pulled out her cloth-wrapped lunch. A deliberate accidental bump in the hallway that sent her books scattering. They made sure everyone noticed, but no one could prove it was on purpose. One Tuesday during chemistry lab, they found a new way to twist the knife. The class was paired up to test pH levels in household liquids. Amara was working with Leo again. They'd become quiet allies, bonded by shared silence and mutual respect. They'd just finished testing vinegar when Taylor leaned over from the next table, her voice sugary sweet. "Hey, does your tap water even have a pH? Or is it just brown?" A few kids chuckled. Leo stiffened but said nothing. Amara kept her eyes on the beaker, stirring slowly. "My water's fine," she said calmly. "Cleaner than most bottled brands, actually." Taylor blinked, caught off guard. She'd expected embarrassment, not a fact. But she recovered fast. "Right. Because you'd know all about bottled water, wouldn't you?" she said, glancing at Amara's reusable bottle, a plain stainless steel one with a dent near the base. "I bet you've never even been inside a Whole Foods." Amara didn't look up. "I've been inside plenty. I just don't need a $9 smoothie to feel important." The room went quiet for a beat. Even Taylor's friends exchanged uneasy glances. That wasn't the script. The scholarship kid was supposed to shrink, not speak back, but Amara hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't insulted anyone. She'd just stated a truth, and in doing so, flipped the power balance, if only for a second. Taylor's smile tightened. "Whatever. Just don't spill anything on my lab coat. It's dry clean only." Later that week, during history, the group project deadline loomed. Amara and Leo had done most of the work, researching primary sources, creating a timeline, even designing a small poster with quotes from civil rights leaders. They'd stayed late twice to finish it, using the school's printer after hours because Amara didn't have one at home. On presentation day, their group was called up first. Amara spoke clearly, confidently explaining how grassroots organizing, not just famous speeches, drove real change. She mentioned local heroes, women whose names never made headlines but whose courage kept movements alive. Her voice carried something quiet but strong, like a heartbeat you could feel even if you couldn't hear it. When they finished, Mr. Dawson nodded approvingly. "Excellent work. Thoughtful, well-researched, and deeply respectful of the subject matter." A few students clapped. Taylor didn't. After class, as Amara was packing up, Taylor approached, not with her usual smirk, but with a strange mix of irritation and something that almost looked like confusion. "You're good at this stuff," she said, arms crossed. "Why do you even bother? You know no one here cares what you think." Amara zipped her bag slowly. "I don't do it for them. I do it because it matters." Taylor stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. But the peace didn't last. The next Monday, Amara opened her locker to find a folded piece of notebook paper tucked into the door hinge. She unfolded it carefully. In neat, looping handwriting, it read, "Scholarship Sally doesn't belong here. Go back to wherever you came from." Her stomach dropped. Not because the words hurt, they did, but because they felt so final, so cold. Like a door slamming shut, she didn't throw it away. She slipped it into her notebook, right behind the page where she'd written her grandfather's favorite saying, "Dignity is the armor no one can take from you." That afternoon, she went to the debate club meeting. It was the one place at Crestwood where she felt like herself. The club was small, just 6 students and a tired-looking teacher who loved logic more than small talk. They argued about ethics, policy, justice. No one cared what you wore or how you got to school. All that mattered was how well you could think on your feet. Amara had joined on a whim during orientation week. She'd never debated before, but she loved words, their weight, their rhythm, their power to change minds. In her first practice round, she'd been nervous, stumbling over her points. But by the third meeting, she was holding her own against seniors who'd been doing this for years. Today's topic was, should private schools receive public funding? Amara was assigned the against side. She stood, took a breath, and began. Private schools already have resources most public schools dream of. Smaller classes, newer textbooks, counselors who actually know your name. Giving them public money doesn't level the playing field. It tilts it further. She spoke for 2 minutes straight, citing studies, drawing parallels to historical inequities, even quoting a Supreme Court justice. When she finished, the room was silent for a beat. Then someone clapped. Then another. Soon the whole group was applauding. The teacher smiled. That was one of the best arguments I've heard all year. After the meeting, a girl named Priya, quiet, observant, always wearing mismatched socks, walked with Amara to the bus stop. "You're really good at that," Priya said. "Like scary good," Amara laughed softly. "Thanks. It helps to care about what you're saying." Priya nodded. "Most people here just say what sounds smart. You actually mean it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment as the bus rumbled toward them. Then Priya added, "Taylor's group is scared of you, you know." Amara turned, surprised. "Scared of me?" "Yeah, because you don't play by their rules. You don't beg for their approval. And you're smarter than all of them put together. That freaks them out." Amara didn't know what to say. She'd never thought of it that way. She'd assumed they mocked her because she was weak. But maybe it was the opposite. The bus arrived, doors hissing open. As she stepped on, she glanced back at the school. Its tall columns, its manicured lawn, its gleaming windows that reflected the sunset like mirrors. It looked like a place of opportunity. But for some, it was also a cage of expectations, of appearances, of never being enough unless you fit a certain mold. At home, her mom was making stew, her grandmother's recipe, thick with sweet potatoes and collard greens. The smell filled the apartment, warm and familiar. "How was school?" her mom asked, stirring the pot. Amara sat at the table, pulling out her homework. "Same as always." Her mom turned, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're not telling me everything." Amara hesitated. Then quietly, "Someone left a note in my locker today, telling me to leave." Her mom's face tightened, but she didn't cry or rage. She just walked over and hugged her, long and tight, the kind of hug that says, "I see you and you're not alone." "They're small people," her mom whispered. "Don't let their smallness make you small too." That night, Amara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about her grandfather, how he'd been turned away from banks because of the color of his skin, how he'd been called names, denied loans, told his dreams were too big for a man like him. And yet, he'd built something lasting, not just buildings, but a legacy of quiet strength. She wasn't building anything yet, but she was holding a line, and that mattered. The next day, things escalated. It started at lunch. Amara sat at her usual spot, eating her sandwich, reading a novel she'd borrowed from the school library. Suddenly, a shadow fell over her table. Taylor stood there, flanked by 2 of her closest friends. "Mind if we join you?" Taylor asked, though she didn't wait for an answer. She slid into the seat across from Amara and placed a glossy magazine on the table, Atlanta Luxury Living. On the cover was a photo of a sleek downtown high-rise. "Did you know this building sold for $20 million last month?" Taylor said, flipping to a page inside. "My dad's firm handled the deal. It's owned by some old guy's trust. Johnson something." Amara's breath caught. She knew that building. Her grandfather had bought the land for it in 1987. He'd named it after her grandmother. She said nothing. Taylor kept talking, voice dripping with condescension. "Must be nice to have that kind of money. Not like some people eating peanut butter like it's 1950. One of her friends giggled. "Maybe she's related to the Johnsons." Oh wait, she probably cleans their offices. Amara closed her book slowly. She looked up, meeting Taylor's eyes directly for the first time in weeks. You don't know anything about me, she said, voice low but steady. And you don't know anything about the Johnsons either. Taylor blinked. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Amara said, standing up, that wealth isn't just about what you show off. Sometimes the people who have the most are the ones who choose to live with the least because they remember where they came from. She picked up her lunchbox and walked away, heart pounding but posture straight. She didn't look back, but she could feel their stunned silence trailing behind her like a shadow. That evening, her mom got a call from the school, not about the note, not about the lunch incident, but about the debate club. The teacher had recommended Amara for the regional tournament, a big deal, with judges from local colleges and even a few news reporters. It would be held in 3 weeks, at the annual Crestwood Charity Gala. Amara's mom sat down hard on the kitchen chair. The gala? That's where they honor donors, where your grandfather was recognized. Amara nodded. She'd been thinking about it all afternoon. She could say no, skip the tournament, avoid the spotlight, but something inside her had shifted. I think I should go, she said. Her mom looked at her for a long time. Then she smiled, a small, proud smile. Then we'll go, and we'll show them exactly who you are. Not as a rich heiress, not as a scholarship kid, just as Amara, smart, steady, and unshaken. The next few days passed in a strange calm. Taylor didn't approach her again. The whispers didn't stop, but they lost some of their sting. Amara threw herself into preparing for the debate, researching, practicing arguments, even watching old footage of courtroom trials to study how people held their ground under pressure. She also started noticing things she hadn't before. The way some students glanced at her with curiosity, not judgment. How Leo now nodded at her in the hallway like they were comrades in arms. How Priya left a sticky note on her desk one day that just said, "Truth wins, always." She wasn't alone. She never had been, and sooner than anyone expected, the truth would come out. Not because she wanted it to, but because sometimes the world has a way of revealing what's been hidden, especially when it's time for people to see clearly. For now, though, she kept walking, one step at a time, head high, heart steady, ready for whatever came next. The week before the Crestwood Charity Gala moved like slow honey, thick, sweet, and full of nervous energy. Posters went up in the halls showing black tie silhouettes and the school crest glowing under soft lights. Teachers mentioned it in passing, reminding students to represent the Crestwood spirit. Parents began arriving for fittings at the dry cleaner down the street. And in the cafeteria, conversation shifted from weekend plans to who was wearing what, whose family was sponsoring which part of the evening, and most importantly, who would be seated near the head table. Amara tried not to think about it too much. She had her debate prep to focus on, her history paper due Friday, and a growing stack of college brochures her mom kept leaving on the kitchen counter like hopeful breadcrumbs. But no matter how hard she studied, or how many times she rehearsed her opening statement in front of the bathroom mirror, the gala loomed in the back of her mind like a storm cloud she couldn't outrun. Her mom, though, was all business. The weekend before the event, she took Amara to a small boutique downtown, one that didn't carry designer labels but had dresses with clean lines and quiet elegance. They found one in deep navy blue, simple but cut to flatter, with a high neckline and a skirt that fell just above the ankle. It cost more than they usually spent on anything, but her mom didn't flinch. "This is for you," she said, handing over her card without hesitation. "Not for them. For you." They bought matching shoes, modest heels, black, comfortable enough to stand in all night. No flashy jewelry, just her grandfather's old pocket watch on a thin silver chain, the one he used to carry in his vest. "He'd want you to wear it," her mom said softly. "Not to show off, but to remember." The night of the gala arrived with a cool breeze rolling in off the Chattahoochee River. Amara stood in front of the mirror in their tiny hallway, adjusting the clasp on the watch. Her hair was pulled back in a low twist, a few curls escaping at the nape of her neck. She looked like herself, not trying to be anyone else, not hiding, just present. Her mom came out of her bedroom in a simple black dress, her hair neatly braided, a single pearl pin at her collar. She smiled when she saw Amara. "You look like your grandmother," she said, voice thick with something warm and unspoken. They took the bus downtown, just like always, though tonight it felt different. The city lights shimmered through the windows and the other passengers seemed to sense the occasion, sitting a little straighter, speaking a little softer. When they stepped off near the school's grand entrance, they were met with valets, red carpet runners, and clusters of students in tuxedos and glittering gowns posing for photos under the portico. Amara kept her eyes forward. She didn't look for Taylor or her group. She didn't scan the crowd for judgment. She just walked beside her mom, hand lightly on her elbow, both of them breathing steady. Inside, the gymnasium, usually filled with squeaking sneakers and echoing shouts, had been transformed. Crystal chandeliers hung from the rafters. Long tables draped in ivory linen held centerpieces of white roses and candles. A string quartet played softly near the stage. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with trays of sparkling water and tiny hors d'oeuvres. It was beautiful and overwhelming. Amara spotted Leo near the back, looking deeply uncomfortable in a rented tux that was slightly too big. He gave her a small wave. Priya was there too, in a bright yellow dress that clashed gloriously with everything, and somehow made her look radiant. She grinned and mouthed, "You got this." Amara nodded, but her stomach fluttered. This wasn't just a party. It was a performance. And tonight she'd be on stage, not just as a debater, but as herself. The debate segment was scheduled for after dinner. While guests mingled and sipped drinks, Amara and the other finalists were ushered backstage, a converted storage room now filled with nervous energy and last-minute note shuffling. Her topic: True equity in education requires dismantling private institutions that reinforce class divides. She'd argued the opposite side in practice, but this time she'd been assigned to defend the motion, and she meant to do it well. Dinner began. Amara and her mom were seated at table 12, near the edge of the room, not the head table. That was reserved for major donors and board members, but close enough to see the stage. Taylor and her parents sat at table 3, front and center, laughing with the headmaster like they owned the room. Amara didn't look their way. She focused on her plate, on her mom's quiet stories about her first day working at the library, on the way the candlelight made the silverware gleam. Then, just as dessert was being served, chocolate torte with raspberry coulis, the lights dimmed slightly. The headmaster stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand, his tuxedo crisp, his smile practiced. "Good evening, friends, families, and champions of education," he began, voice warm and resonant. "Tonight we gather not just to celebrate Crestwood's legacy, but to honor those who make that legacy possible." Polite applause. "We are deeply grateful to our community of supporters," he continued. "Your generosity ensures that every student, regardless of background, has access to excellence." More applause. Amara shifted in her seat. She knew what was coming next. Every year they announced the largest donations. This year, the headmaster said, pausing for effect, "We are humbled to share that the Johnson Family Foundation has made a historic commitment to our school's future." A ripple went through the room. The Johnson name carried weight in Atlanta: old money, real estate, quiet influence. People leaned forward. "In honor of the late Mr. Elijah Johnson, a visionary builder, community leader, and devoted grandfather, the foundation has pledged a gift of $2 million. Gasps. Murmurs. Someone dropped a fork. "This extraordinary donation," the headmaster went on, "will establish the Elijah Johnson Scholarship Fund, providing full tuition and mentorship for students from underrepresented communities for years to come." The screen behind him lit up. A black and white photo appeared. A tall black man in a worn suit standing proudly in front of a brick building with a Johnson Properties sign. Beside him, a young girl no older than 10, grinning in a school uniform, holding his hand. Amara. The room fell silent. Every eye turned. Not to the screen. To her, she sat perfectly still. Her hands rested in her lap. Her breath didn't catch. She didn't look away. She just met the stares with calm, steady eyes, the same eyes her grandfather had in that photo. Taylor's face went pale. Her mother leaned over, whispering urgently. At table 3, the laughter had vanished. The confidence, the ease, it all crumbled in an instant. Amara's mom reached over and squeezed her hand under the table. No words, just warmth. The headmaster continued, unaware of the earthquake he'd just triggered. We are honored to have Ms. Amara Johnson with us tonight, and later she will represent Crestwood in our regional debate showcase. Applause erupted, louder this time, genuine, awed. People stood. Some even wiped their eyes, but Amara didn't stand. She didn't smile for the cameras. She simply nodded once, then turned to her mom and whispered, "I'm ready." Backstage again, the other debaters stared at her like she'd grown wings. One boy stammered, You're the Johnson?" Amara just smiled faintly. "I'm still me." When her turn came, she walked onto the stage with the same quiet steps she used every day in the hallway. The spotlight was brighter, the audience larger, but her voice didn't shake. She spoke about access. About dignity. About how education shouldn't be a prize for the privileged, but a right for all. She quoted her grandfather, "A building is only as strong as its foundation, and the foundation of this country is its children." She didn't mention Crestwood by name. Didn't call out anyone in the room. But everyone knew, and that was enough. When she finished, the silence lasted 3 full seconds. Then the room exploded in applause. Not polite clapping, real roaring standing ovation. Even the judges were on their feet. Taylor didn't clap. She sat frozen, eyes wide, hands clenched in her lap. Her father leaned over and said something sharp. She didn't answer. After the debate, as guests milled about with champagne and congratulations, people approached Amara, not with awe, but with respect. A teacher she barely knew hugged her. A board member asked about her college plans. Priya ran over, eyes shining. "You are amazing." "And wait, $2 million?" Amara laughed softly. "It's not mine to spend. It's for kids like me, like you." Later, near the exit, Taylor appeared, alone, no entourage, no smirk. Just a girl in a too-tight dress looking smaller than Amara had ever seen her. "I didn't know," Taylor said, voice barely above a whisper. Amara didn't soften, but she didn't harden either. "You didn't ask," Taylor swallowed. I thought you were just pretending to be smart, trying to fit in." "I wasn't pretending," Amara said, "and I wasn't trying to fit in. I was just being me. You just didn't see me." Taylor looked down at her shoes. Designer heels that probably cost more than Amara's entire outfit. "I'm sorry," she said, and for the first time it sounded real. Amara nodded. "Sorry doesn't fix everything, but it's a start." She turned to leave, but Taylor called after her. Will you still be at school Monday?" Amara paused. "Of course." "Why wouldn't I be?" "Because people will treat you differently now." Amara smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Maybe, but I won't let that change who I am. And I hope you don't either." She walked back to her mom, who was waiting by the bus stop, arms crossed against the night chill. "Well?" her mom asked. "They saw me," Amara said simply. And now they have to decide what to do with that." They boarded the bus together. The seats were empty except for an older man reading a newspaper. As the bus pulled away from the school, Amara looked out the window. The lights of Crestwood faded behind them, but the feeling in her chest didn't fade. It grew. She hadn't wanted this moment. She hadn't planned for it. But now that it was here, she wouldn't waste it, because the truth wasn't just about money. It was about visibility, about refusing to be erased, about showing the world that worth isn't hidden. It's just waiting for someone to look closely enough to see it. And tonight, for the first time, they had. The bus rolled through quiet streets, past houses with porch lights on, past parks where crickets sang in the dark. Amara leaned her head against the window, tired but peaceful. She wasn't a rich heiress. She wasn't a scholarship kid. She was just Amara, granddaughter, student, debater, daughter. And that was more than enough. Monday would come. The whispers would change. Some people would fawn. Others would resent. But she'd keep walking the same way she always had. Head high, heart open, feet steady on the ground. Because the real legacy wasn't the money. It was the choice to live with kindness even when others don't. To stand tall, even when the world tries to shrink you. And that was something no gala, no donation, no spotlight could ever take away. Monday morning arrived with the usual Atlanta humidity pressing against the windows like a heavy blanket. But everything felt different. The air itself seemed charged, as if the whole school had taken a deep breath over the weekend and was now holding it. Amara noticed it the moment she stepped off the bus. The usual morning rush, backpacks slung, earbuds in, eyes on phones, slowed as students turned to look. Not with the old sneers or sideways glances, but with something new. Curiosity, uncertainty, even a kind of nervous awe. She walked through the front gates the same way she always had. Back straight, lunchbox in hand, shoes scuffed from yesterday's rain, but now whispers followed her like rustling leaves. That's her, the Johnson girl. She donated $2 million. She's been here the whole time? Amara kept her eyes forward. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just walked. Inside, though, her mind was racing. She'd known things would change after the gala, but she hadn't expected this, the sudden shift in how people saw her, as if her worth had only just been activated, like a switch flipped by a dollar amount. In homeroom, the teacher greeted her with an extra nod, a little too warm. At her desk, someone had left a single white rose. No note, just the flower resting on her textbook like an offering. She picked it up gently, then placed it in the classroom vase by the window. A small act, but it said everything. I'm not here for your gifts. I'm here for the work. By second period, the rumors were already twisting. Someone claimed she drove a luxury car and only took the bus as a cover. Another said her family owned half of downtown, and she'd been slumming it for fun. Amara heard it all in fragments between classes, in the hushed tones of kids who didn't realize she was right behind them. She didn't correct them, let them talk. Truth didn't need defending, it just needed time. Lunchtime was the real test. She walked into the cafeteria with her usual cloth-wrapped sandwich, expecting the usual empty table near the window. But today, two things happened at once. First, Taylor appeared alone, no friends flanking her, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing last year's uniform blazer instead of the new designer one she usually flaunted. She hovered near Amara's table, shifting her weight from foot to foot like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to speak. Second, 3 other students, kids Amara barely knew, stood up from different tables and walked over, trays in hand. Mind if we join you? Asked a boy from her biology class, voice tentative. Amara looked at them, then at Taylor, then back at the empty seats. There's room, she said simply. They sat. No fanfare, no dramatic speeches. Just 4 students eating lunch together like it was the most normal thing in the world. Taylor stayed standing for a moment longer, then quietly took the seat farthest from Amara, unfolding her own lunch, a plain turkey sandwich on whole wheat. No fancy packaging. The silence wasn't awkward. It was careful, like everyone was learning a new language. Halfway through the meal, Taylor cleared her throat. I wanted to say again, I'm sorry. For everything. Amara didn't look up from her sandwich. Sorry for what exactly? Taylor flinched. For assuming things. For making you feel like you didn't belong. For being cruel when I didn't even know you. That's a start, Amara said. But saying sorry doesn't erase what happened. It just means you're ready to do better. Taylor nodded, eyes down. I want to do better. Amara finally looked at her. Then prove it, not to me. To yourself. The rest of the week unfolded like a slow thaw. The social order at Crestwood, once rigid as stone, began to crack and shift. Some students doubled down on their old ways, whispering that Amara was using her money to buy respect or that she'd tricked everyone. But most were quieter now, watching, waiting to see what she'd do next. What she did was nothing flashy. She went to class, took notes, asked questions, stayed late to help Leo with his math homework, joined Priya in the library to plan the next debate topic. She wore the same second-hand blazer, ate the same peanut butter sandwiches, rode the same bus home, and slowly people began to see her worth hadn't changed. Only their eyes had. One afternoon after debate club, the teacher pulled her aside. The regional tournament is next month, he said. You'll be representing Crestwood, and the judges asked if you'd consider speaking at the opening ceremony about equity in education. Amara hesitated. I'm not a spokesperson. You don't have to be, he said gently. Just be yourself. That's enough. She thought about it all the way home. Not about the stage or the audience, but about the kids who'd never get a chance to sit in a classroom like hers. Not because they weren't smart, but because the doors were locked. Her grandfather's donation would help, yes, but real change needed more than money. It needed voices, she said yes. Meanwhile, Taylor started showing up to the school's volunteer tutoring program, something she'd mocked just weeks before as charity work for do-gooders. Now, She sat with middle schoolers twice a week, helping them with reading. She didn't talk about it, didn't post it on social media, just showed up quiet and focused. Amara noticed.
She didn't say anything.
But one day, she left a book on Taylor's desk, The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson, with a sticky note that read, "Understanding starts with listening." Taylor read it cover to cover. Then she returned it with a note of her own. "Thank you for seeing me, even when I didn't deserve it." The real turning point came during a school assembly. The principal announced a new initiative, the Elijah Johnson Mentorship Circle, pairing scholarship students with alumni donors for guidance, internships, and support. Amara was named student coordinator. As she stood at the podium to explain the program, she didn't mention her grandfather's name once. She talked about community, about lifting each other up, about how talent is everywhere but opportunity isn't. "We don't need saviors," she said, voice calm but strong. "We need partners. People who believe in us before we've proven ourselves, because everyone deserves that chance." After the assembly, a line formed. Not for autographs or photos, but to sign up. Students who'd never spoken to her before stepped forward, shy, hopeful, determined. Even a few from Taylor's old group joined the list. Later that day, in the hallway between classes, Taylor caught up to Amara near the lockers. "I signed up to be a mentor," she said. Amara turned. "You sure? It's a real commitment, I know," Taylor said. "But I want to be part of something that matters, not just part of the crowd." Amara studied her face, the sincerity in her eyes, the absence of performance. "Good," she said. "We'll need people like you." "People like me?" Taylor asked, surprised. "People who've made mistakes," Amara said, "but are willing to learn from them." That night at home, Amara's mom made her favorite meal, fried catfish, collard greens, cornbread. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound the clink of forks and the hum of the old refrigerator. "You're handling all this so well," her mom finally said. Amara shrugged. "I'm just doing what Granddad would have done. He'd be proud," her mom said softly. "Not because of the money. Because of how you're using your voice." Amara thought about that. She hadn't wanted attention, hadn't wanted to be a symbol, but maybe that was the point. Sometimes standing in your truth, even quietly, becomes a kind of light for others. The next week, something unexpected happened. A group of parents, mostly from families who'd been at Crestwood for generations, sent a letter to the school board. Not to complain, but to ask, how can we do more? They wanted to expand the mentorship program, fund transportation for students who lived far away, create a summer bridge program for incoming scholarship kids. The headmaster called Amara into his office. "This is because of you," he said, holding up the letter. "No," she corrected gently. "It's because people finally saw what was missing." "I just held up a mirror," he smiled. "Still, you've changed this place." "I hope so," she said. "But the work's not done." And it wasn't, because real change wasn't about one donation or one speech or one apology. It was about daily choices, choosing kindness over cruelty, curiosity over assumption, action over silence. By the end of the month, the cafeteria looked different. Tables that used to be divided by brand names and last names now mixed students from every background. Debate club had doubled in size. Even the bus stop outside school had become a place where kids waited together, talking about homework or music or weekend plans. No invisible lines. Amara still sat by the window sometimes, but now she rarely sat alone. One rainy afternoon, as she waited for the bus with Priya and Leo, Taylor walked up, holding an umbrella. "Mind if I share?" she asked. Amara looked at her, really looked. Not as the girl who'd mocked her, but as someone trying, stumbling, growing. "Sure," she said, scooting over. They stood under the umbrella, shoulders almost touching, watching the rain fall on the pavement. No grand words, no dramatic confessions, just four students waiting for a bus, learning how to be human together. And in that quiet moment, Amara knew. The freeze was over. The thaw had begun, and from it something new and better was starting to grow. The school year wound down like a slow exhale, warm days stretching longer, backpacks growing lighter as final exams ended, and the air thick with the buzz of summer plans. But at Crestwood, something deeper was shifting. It wasn't just the end of a semester. It felt like the end of an old way of thinking, and the beginning of something quieter, truer. Amara stood on the edge of the courtyard one afternoon, watching students pack up for the last day. Some hugged, others snapped photos, a few already slipping into summer clothes, bright shorts, tank tops, sandals that clicked against the pavement. She wore her uniform one last time, blazer neatly buttoned, skirt pressed, shoes polished despite the scuffs. She wasn't sentimental about the clothes, but she respected what they represented. Discipline, effort, showing up even when it was hard. Just a few months ago, this place had felt like a battlefield. Now it felt like home. Not because everyone loved her, but because she'd carved out a space where she could be herself without apology. And in doing so, she'd made room for others to do the same. The student council elections had happened 2 weeks earlier. Amara hadn't planned to run. She'd been focused on finals, on the regional debate tournament, which she'd won though she barely mentioned it, on helping organize the first summer session of the Elijah Johnson Mentorship Circle. But then Priya, Leo, and half a dozen other students showed up at her locker with handmade posters and a petition signed by over 200 peers. "You're the only one who actually listens," Priya had said. "Not just to the loud voices. To everyone." Amara had hesitated. "I'm not trying to be a leader." "Maybe," Leo added quietly, "but you already are." She ran, and won by a landslide, not because of her last name or her grandfather's gift, but because she'd shown day after day that leadership wasn't about power. It was about responsibility, about seeing people, really seeing them, and asking, "How can I help?" Now, as president-elect, she'd spent the last week meeting with teachers, custodians, cafeteria workers, anyone who kept the school running. She asked what they needed, what students didn't notice, what could be better. She took notes in that same black notebook she'd used since day one, filling pages with ideas for next year, a quiet room for overwhelmed students, a clothing closet for those who couldn't afford uniforms, a monthly community table lunch where no cliques were allowed, just shared food and real conversation. She wasn't trying to fix everything, just to plant seeds. Taylor had been part of those meetings too, not as a former queen bee, but as a volunteer coordinator for the mentorship program. She'd grown quieter, more thoughtful. She still carried herself with confidence, but it wasn't the brittle kind anymore. It was steadier, rooted in something real. One afternoon, while sorting donated books for the summer reading program, she'd looked up and said, "I used to think being liked meant being perfect. Now I think it means being honest." Amara had just nodded. Honesty's harder, but it lasts longer. Their friendship, if you could call it that, wasn't loud or dramatic. It was built in small moments, sharing an umbrella in the rain, proofreading each other's college essays, sitting together at lunch without needing to fill the silence with words. It wasn't forgiveness wrapped in a bow. It was repair, slow and careful, like mending a torn seam stitch by stitch. The night before the last day of school, Amara's mom made a special dinner: fried chicken, mac and cheese, peach cobbler with vanilla ice cream melting on top. They ate on the porch listening to crickets and the distant hum of traffic. "You've done good, baby," her mom said, wiping her hands on a napkin. "Better than I ever could have hoped." Amara shook her head. "I didn't do it alone." "No," her mom agreed. "But you held your ground. That's the hardest part." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching fireflies blink in the neighbor's yard. Amara thought about her grandfather, how he'd built his empire not for fame but for family. How he'd taught her that money was a tool, not a trophy, and how he'd always said, "The real measure of a person isn't what they have, but what they leave behind." She hadn't left behind a building or a fortune, but maybe she'd left behind something just as lasting, a shift in how people saw each other. The next morning, Amara arrived early. The school was quiet, sunlight streaming through empty hallways. She walked to the main office and handed the secretary a thick envelope. "What's this?" the woman asked, adjusting her glasses. "The first draft of next year's student council plan," Amara said, "with budget estimates, volunteer sign-ups, and teacher feedback. I figured it'd be easier to start now than wait till fall." The secretary smiled, really smiled. "You know, when you first came here, I thought you'd last a month." Amara laughed softly. "I almost didn't, but you stayed. And you changed things." "I just showed up," Amara said. "The rest happened because people chose to listen." Later that day, during the closing assembly, the headmaster called her to the stage one last time. The gym was packed. Students, teachers, a few parents who'd come to celebrate the year's end. Before we say goodbye, he said, I'd like to recognize someone who reminded us all what Crestwood is truly about. Not prestige, not privilege, but character. Applause rose as Amara walked up. She didn't wear a fancy dress or hold a trophy. Just her uniform, her notebook, and the same calm presence she'd carried since day one. When she spoke, her voice was clear but not loud. I came here thinking I had to prove I belonged, she said. But belonging isn't something you earn. It's something you offer to yourself and to others. You don't have to be rich or popular or perfect. You just have to show up as you are and make space for others to do the same. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Some she knew well, others she'd never spoken to. This school is better when we see each other. Not as labels, not as rumors, but as people. And I hope next year we keep choosing to see. The applause that followed wasn't just polite. It was warm, full, alive. Even the teachers stood. Taylor clapped the hardest, eyes bright with something that looked like pride. Not for Amara, but for the person she was becoming because of her. After the assembly, students lingered, not rushing to leave. Some took photos. Others hugged teachers they'd never thanked before. A group of freshmen gathered around Amara, asking about the mentorship program, about how to join student council, about whether it was okay to be nervous about next year. It's more than okay, she told them. It means you care. As she packed her locker for the last time, she found a small envelope taped to the inside door. Inside was a note from the custodian, Mr. Ruiz, a man who'd barely spoken 10 words to her all year. You treated me like I mattered. No one else did. Thank you. She folded the note carefully and put it in her pocket, right next to her grandfather's watch. On the bus ride home, she sat by the window, watching the city blur past strip malls, churches, parks, apartment buildings where kids waved from balconies. She thought about the students who'd never get a chance to attend a school like Crestwood, about the ones who would but still feel like outsiders, and she knew her work wasn't over. This summer, she'd be interning at a nonprofit that helped low-income students navigate private school applications. In the fall, she'd start college on a full scholarship, though she could have paid full tuition. She'd chosen a school far from Atlanta not to escape but to grow, and she'd keep the mentorship program running, handing leadership to Priya and Leo, with Taylor as the alumni liaison. She wasn't staying to be a symbol. She was leaving to become more. When the bus reached her stop, she stepped off and walked the familiar path to her building. Her mom was waiting on the porch holding 2 ice-cold lemonades. Last day? She asked. Last day, Amara confirmed, taking the glass. They sat side by side on the steps, sipping in silence. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in oranges and purples. Somewhere down the street, a radio played an old soul song, smooth, steady, full of feeling. You proud of yourself? Her mom asked after a while. Amara thought about it. Not the money. Not the spotlight. But the quiet moments helping Leo understand algebra, listening to a shy freshman share her poem, watching Taylor patiently tutor a struggling reader, standing up when it would have been easier to stay silent. Yeah, she said finally, I am. Not because she'd changed the world, but because she'd stayed true in a place that tried to make her small. And in doing so, she'd given others permission to stand tall too. That night, she packed her debate trophy, not in the front of her closet, but in a box with old school projects, photos, and the white rose from that first lunch after the gala. She didn't need reminders of what she'd done. She carried it in how she moved through the world now, with kindness, with clarity, with the quiet certainty that her worth had never depended on anyone else's opinion. The next morning, she woke early, not to an alarm but to birdsong. She made her bed, watered the small plant on her windowsill, and wrote one last note to her future self in the black notebook. Don't forget, you belong wherever you go. Not because of what you have, but because of who you are. She closed the notebook, slipped it into her bag, and walked out the door, ready for whatever came next. And as she stepped into the sunlight, she didn't look back. She just kept walking one steady step at a time toward a future she'd helped build, not with money but with heart.